Carl Jung did not read your horoscope. But he spent his life mapping the inner forces that astrology symbolizes, and nowhere is that force more visible than in Aries. In his library of manuscripts, mandalas, and dream journals, the zodiac appeared not as prediction, but as a symbolic language of the psyche. Aries, the first sign, marks the moment consciousness declares, "I am." For Jung, the human mind was not a machine. It was a cosmos, layered, ancient, and alive. The 12 zodiac signs, he suggested, could be read as 12 modes of psychic energy arranged within us. Aries sits at the front, the first spark of individual will, the psychological frontier where the collective unconscious gives birth to a distinct self. Symbolically, Aries is the ignition point. Before identity, before persona, before the stories we tell about ourselves, there is impulse. A flame in the chest. The urge to move, to begin, to act. Jung would recognize this not as a personality quirk, but as an archetype, the eternal warrior awakening inside ordinary human life. Picture Jung at his desk, studying the Aries symbol as he studied dreams, not literally, but psychologically. What does this sign reveal about courage, aggression, initiation, and the birth of ego? His answer begins with the archetype, a pattern older than any individual, yet lived personally in every person who must become themselves. Jung called certain images archetypes, universal forms that shape human experience from within. The warrior is one of the oldest. In Aries, this archetype appears as protective instinct, decisive action, and the willingness to confront what others avoid. It is not merely combat. It is the inner guardian that says, "Something must be done, and I will do it." Astrology assigns Mars to Aries. Jung would translate Mars differently, as libido in the broadest sense, psychic life force, drive, vitality, the energy that moves us toward action. When Aries energy is healthy, this force fuels courage and creation. When it is unconscious, the same force erupts as rage, restlessness, or compulsive competition. Why does Aries move first? Psychologically, this is the ego's first task, to separate from the collective and act on its own behalf. The person under Aries influence often feels that hesitation equals death. Jung understood this impulse as necessary, but dangerous when it never pauses to listen to the unconscious. The hero's journey begins with a call, and Aries answers before the question is fully formed. In Jungian terms, this is the heroic attitude toward life, confronting the dragon, entering the cave, facing the unknown. The Aries archetype carries the myth of the hero not as fantasy, but as a psychological necessity. Not all warrior energy destroys. One of Aries' deepest functions is protection, standing between vulnerability and threat. Jung saw that many people who appear aggressive are, beneath the armor, defending something fragile, a child self, a wounded heart, an identity not yet secure. Courage and defensiveness share the same fire. Jung wrote that the psyche often demands action before understanding. Aries embodies this paradox. The bridge is incomplete, the outcome is unknown, yet the step is taken. Psychologically, this can birth genuine growth, or reckless repetition. The difference lies in whether action serves individuation, or merely escapes anxiety. The words "I am" mark a revolution in psychic life. Before them, we are submerged in the collective, family, tribe, tradition, instinct. Aries symbolizes the first declaration of individual existence. Jung saw this as essential. Without a conscious ego, there is no one home to integrate the unconscious. Emerging from the collective unconscious is not comfortable. It can feel like loneliness, arrogance, or rebellion. Aries energy often carries this cost. The person learning to be themselves may be accused of selfishness, when in fact they are performing the psychological work of differentiation, without which no mature self can form. Jung emphasized the divine child as an archetype of new consciousness, fragile, radiant, threatened, and indispensable. Aries carries this child hero, the part of us that begins again, that believes the path is worth walking, that carries a small flame through enormous darkness. Every new identity begins this way. Identity is not discovered fully formed. It is forged, hammered into shape through conflict, choice, failure, and return. Aries represents the forge itself, heat, pressure, will. Jung would say the persona begins here too, the mask we craft so the world can recognize who we claim to be. The persona, in Jung's model, is the social face we present. For Aries, that face is often strength itself, fearless, direct, unbreakable. But the persona is a mask, however useful. Behind it, the real person may be tired, afraid, or uncertain. The gap between mask and self is where much Aries suffering begins. Many Aries individuals learn early that vulnerability is unsafe. So they perform courage. They become the one who never wavers, because the applause of others feels like proof of existence. Jung warned that when persona inflation occurs, we mistake the role for the soul. The warrior becomes a costume. On the stage of life, Aries often plays the hero because the script demands it. But performance exhausts. When courage is only external, the inner self remains undeveloped. Jung's task was never to destroy the persona, but to know it as a tool, not the whole person. Leadership can be authentic or compensatory. Aries frequently attracts followers because decisive energy organizes chaos. Yet admiration can become addiction. The leader may forget how to follow, listen, or rest. Jung saw that power without shadow work becomes a prison of one's own image. The shadow contains everything the conscious personality rejects: fear, envy, softness, rage. For Aries, the shadow often mirrors the self, another warrior, darker, less controlled. Jung insisted we do not eliminate the shadow. We meet it. Integration begins when the hero stops denying the monster wears their face. The line between courage and aggression is thinner than Aries prefers to admit. The same Mars energy that protects can destroy. When the unconscious is ignored, assertiveness becomes domination. Jung would ask, is this action in service of life, or in service of a wound that demands repetition? Confidence is grounded self-knowledge. Arrogance is compensation for doubt. Aries' shadow often inflates the ego to avoid contact with inferiority feelings, one of Jung's most important concepts. The taller the pedestal, the longer the fall, and the more violent the unconscious retaliation. Impulse is not evil. It is premature action, movement before reflection. Aries' shadow acts to escape inner tension rather than resolve it. Jung's remedy was not suppression, but relationship with the unconscious, dreams, symbols, active imagination, ways of hearing what the rush forward is trying to outrun. To win is not always to live well. When Aries' energy fixates on victory, others become obstacles. Jung saw this as a failure of relatedness, the psyche turned into a battlefield. True strength includes the capacity to stop fighting when the war is internal, not external. The armored warrior often hides a frightened face. Repressed fear does not vanish, it leaks as irritability, control, or sudden rage. Jung taught that what we refuse to feel consciously returns as fate. For Aries, acknowledging fear is not weakness. It is the beginning of psychological adulthood. Jung analyzed dreams as messages from the unconscious. Aries may appear in dreams as rams, soldiers, fires, or urgent paths, symbols of conflict, initiation, or blocked will. The labyrinth represents the psyche's complexity. Not every aggressive dream means anger, sometimes it means a part of you wants to be born. The ram is one of humanity's oldest sacred symbols: sacrifice, leadership, spring, divine force. In a Jungian reading, the dream ram asks, what instinct is demanding recognition? What part of you is charging forward? The reflection in the dark water suggests the answer lies beneath consciousness. Jung drew mandalas to represent psychic wholeness. Imagine a mandala whose center is Aries fire, surrounded by rage, courage, fear, protection, ambition, and rebirth. This is the sign not as a label, but as a map of inner forces seeking balance. Individuation is the mandala completing itself. Active imagination was Jung's method of dialoguing with inner figures. One could speak with the Aries warrior as with a dream character. What do you want? Why do you rush? What are you protecting? This turns archetype from compulsion into conversation, and conversation into integration. When ego and archetype sit at the same table, psychology becomes transformative. The Aries figure is not an enemy to defeat, but an energy to understand. Jung believed the unconscious responds to respectful engagement. Dominate it, and it erupts. Listen, and it guides. Greek Aries embodied chaotic war, Roman Mars became disciplined protector of the state. Psychologically, Aries carries both potentials. Uncivilized, it devastates. Cultivated, it defends civilization within the self. Myth gives language to what psychology later names, instinct refined through consciousness. The golden fleece is treasure won through heroic ordeal, not comfort, but transformation. For Jung, such myths describe inner processes. The Aries journey asks what price justifies the struggle. Often the treasure is not victory, but the self forged by the quest. Every hero leaves the village. Psychologically, this is the moment we leave inherited identity and walk toward the unknown. Aries symbolizes departure, the courage to begin without guarantee. Jung saw this as necessary for individuation, even when it looks like rebellion to those who remain behind. The dragon guards what is most valuable, and most feared. In Jungian terms, it is the unconscious itself, hoarding energy, memory, and truth. The Aries hero confronts the dragon not to kill the inner world, but to retrieve what was lost: creativity, vitality, authenticity. There is a difference between fighting and warriorhood. The fighter reacts. The warrior chooses. Individuation transforms Aries from reflex into discipline, fire governed by awareness. Jung's mature individual still carries Mars, but Mars serves wholeness rather than ego inflation. Shadow integration is not becoming darker, it is becoming whole. When Aries accepts its fear, impatience, and need for control, the dark double loses destructive power. Jung described this as holding the tension of opposites, courage and vulnerability, action and reflection, self and other. Controlled fire illuminates. Uncontrolled fire consumes. The meditating warrior, sword sheathed, breath steady, represents Aries at its highest development. Energy remains, but ego no longer rides it blindly. This is psychological mastery, not suppression. Perhaps the hardest lesson for Aries: waiting. Jung valued the pauses where meaning ripens. Not every gate opens on command. Sometimes the warrior's greatest act is stillness, observing, listening, allowing the unconscious to speak before the next charge. The reflective pool in the psyche shows what action alone cannot: desire, fear, childhood memory, unlived life. Aries grows when it kneels beside this pool. Jung's path was never only forward. It was inward, downward, and then forward again, with greater wisdom. Removing the helmet is an act of courage greater than battle. When Aries allows trusted others to see the unarmored self, relatedness becomes possible. Jung saw love and vulnerability as essential to wholeness, not obstacles to strength, but expressions of it. In the completed mandala, warrior, child, shadow, and wise observer coexist. This is Jung's vision of individuation, not perfection, but integration. Aries at its fullest is not only first. It is whole. You do not need to be born under Aries to carry this archetype. Every person who has ever stood up, spoken first, defended another, or begun again knows this fire. Jung's insight is democratic. Archetypes belong to humanity, not to birth charts alone. Taken symbolically, Aries names a psychological pattern: initiation, will, identity, conflict, and renewal. Whether astrology is literal or metaphorical for you, the inner warrior remains real. The question is not whether Aries defines you. It is whether you will relate to that force consciously. Jung closed many nights of writing with symbols still glowing in the dark: mandalas, dreams, zodiac wheels. Aries, for him, was never a horoscope column. It was a mirror of the psyche at its most raw and most necessary, the moment life declares itself and dares to begin. Keep looking inward.